We're live.
Hello.
And my new title seemed to play at about 2K res. So like that didn't work very well. But hey ho, I'll have a new one next week. So
Tim, it was like being in Star Wars, and then I started getting hypnotized, and then I had to.
yeah. Well, there's supposed to be little images of all the interview things going around.
Yeah, I was going to say, like with Christelle, I was getting properly sucked into the visuals and a little bit disappointed, I must say, to suddenly come to the live part of the show. But that's okay.
Yeah. Maybe I should just have a big spinning disc, like one of those hypnotic things, and then just forget about it. And it's like, you had a really good interview. Now just go and subscribe, and then we can just go down the pub for half.
This is the best thing you have ever seen.
It was great, Tim. So those who may have noticed, Tim has redone our intro. That's what we're talking about. We have Andy here today, and I'm excited to finally meet you in person, which you were noting in the green room that I like to say this, but we've had some interaction online. And so to finally meet a friend that I have online is really exciting. So thank you for being here, Andy.
Well, likewise, and I hope we can maintain that excitement post the interview as well. Who knows?
Yeah.
So, Andy, we're going to ask you, I just pulled up some things because there's more that I want to ask you about that you've touched on, but tell us, who's Andy? What exactly do you do? Somehow there's youth and there's life coaching involved. So let's start with that. Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those questions I get asked quite a lot, and I probably spend quite a lot of time asking myself it, to be honest. I'm not wholly sure I've got a pithy elevator pitch answer. But yeah, so my name's Andy. I've just, much to my shock and surprise, turned 51, which feels like more mileage than I expected to have under the bonnet. I've been a youth worker for a lot of my career, but I've also worked in the kind of voluntary and charity sector in a wider context. And for the last 2 or 3 years, kind of forced by the COVID pandemic to a degree, I've been self-employed as a life coach, whatever the hell that actually means. And I also do quite a lot of accredited training in first aid for mental health and other kind of mental health. And I use the term mental fitness quite a lot because obviously we just want to emphasize that there's some good and there's some bad fitness potentially. And that is all very much informed by my own personal poor experience of mental health. About 10 years ago, I had what I guess our parents' generation would refer to as a mental breakdown. I was very, very poorly for maybe a couple of years. And that had significant effects on me. And I'm trying to build out of that kind of, I would say, like, I'm not sure about the theological reflection of it, but if you believe in a God, I don't like the argument that God allows suffering, but I do think that if there's a God, what they do is work quite hard with you to bring beauty out of suffering, turn the crap into manure, if you like, to build some roses. So that's what I'm trying to do. And hopefully some roses are appearing.
Okay. Well, Christelle's not coming with a secondary question for once. That's good. I'm
behaving, Tim. I'm waiting.
I'm most interested in this mental health first aid thing.
Yeah.
So, what are some, like, I don't know, let's say that Christelle's having a breakdown because of the show. What kind of things would you do in terms of helping somebody in that first aid situation for mental health?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when I'm trying to explain it, I often deliberately draw the parallel between physical first aid and mental health first aid. So if we're a physical first aider, we meet somebody in a crisis, perhaps they've been hit by a car or something, and our job isn't to fix them. Our job isn't even to identify exactly what's gone wrong. Our job is to help them as best we can, kind of not get worse and get them to the appropriate help. So with mental health first aid, that's exactly what we do. So if Christelle was having some mental health issues, one of the things I wouldn't do was try and diagnose what I thought was going on. I might have some suspicions. I might even, if it's things like depression, anxiety, which I have first-hand experience of, I might be quite confident that the symptoms she's displaying are those things. But I'm not a mental health professional, so my job is not to diagnose. So I would never diagnose. I wouldn't certainly prescribe treatment. But I would try and talk to her and try and get her to be as calm as possible, get her to have an understanding of what was going on and find a way of articulating that understanding. And then we would have a conversation about, well, do you need to see someone professionally? Are there people in your life personally who you can turn to? A lot of mental health crises are quite short term, quite in the moment. and we don't always need to turn to professionals, but we must never rule that out. You know, I always say it's better to get the professionals involved and for them to say, actually, we're not needed, than get a professional involved if there's a risk of it. But often we can, you know, you can turn to a partner or a family member or trusted friend, and you can say, look, I'm just not coping very well. Actually, it doesn't even need to be someone, you know, that you know very well. I mean, when I was, to turn it quite dark quite quickly, when I was feeling suicidal myself, some of the interventions that stopped me from carrying out any of that ideation, as we call it, were kind of incidental or accidental. I mean, one time I had a quite well thought out plan, but somebody said, "Did I want to pop to the pub for a pint?" I didn't really know them very well. Terrible company for that hour or so that I sat there with them. But by the time I finished the pint, I don't recommend alcohol for depression.
Yeah.
By the time I finished that pint, the kind of compulsion had passed, so I went home and I was fine. So it's that kind of thing. So trying to get people to calm, trying to stop it from getting worse, and then trying to identify, or we often talk about the language of signposting, trying to help people see what help is accessible and how they can access the stuff that feels further away.
Andy, let's go a little bit deeper, because many of our friends on the show have experience with anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation, and I fall into that category as well. And so the thing is, often those of us who suffer from mental health conditions, there may not be those signs that people think that they should be looking for on the outside. Some of our friends with some of the biggest anxiety and depression conflicts in their life are the happiest. You would think they're the happiest. They're the ones telling the jokes. So the signs aren't really there. And sometimes it sneaks up on us. So we may not even realize that we're depressed until we're deep in, you know. What then? I mean, how can you help the common person who maybe doesn't suffer from depression or anxiety to recognize those invisible signs that aren't immediately noticeable?
Yeah, well, I love that question, Christelle. You make a great life coach. I mean, it's really compound, actually. There's lots of different things in that I want to speak to. One is, like, often, again, my own lived experience, which I'm always very conscious that I don't want to say is necessarily true of anyone else. You know, everyone experiences these things differently. But I think, having thought about it, having experienced that quite significant episode, say about a decade ago, I think I was probably depressed since my mid-teens, maybe even earlier. So I'd probably been carrying that for 20, 30 years by that point. And I didn't even know. You know, I have, I hope, a half-decent sense of humour. That was quite often a presenting thing. I often presented as being relatively chilled about things, even though I probably also had anxiety. Definitely, some of my closer friends would have said I could be a bit of a grumpy sod from time to time. And I think that was partially, you know, personality defect, but partially the depression talking as well. So it's not just how we can recognize it in other people, it's also about how we can begin to recognize it in us. We all of us suffer from depression, anxiety, other things like that to some extent, not necessarily from a clinical point of view, from a diagnosable point of view. You know, we all have, you know, that's one of the problems I think with things like anxiety or even things like OCD. You know, I'm sure you've got people in your life who go, oh, I'm a little bit OCD, and what they mean is they get fixated on patterns of behavior, or they have certain ways of looking at the world, which they've labeled themselves, but it's not a clinical label, and it's probably more harmful than beneficial. And likewise with depression and anxiety, everyone gets a bit grumpy, everyone gets a bit panicky. I mean, you know, we talk a lot on the mental health first aid about stress and the stress reflex, the fight or flight response, which is completely good. You know, it's designed to keep us alive. It's just that the saber-toothed tiger isn't there to threaten us. It's a deadline, which maybe hasn't got the immediate complications and concerns. But our reptile brain doesn't know that. The part of our brain that's controlling it just goes, threat, and shuts down our higher functioning and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, to really political answer, not answered your question at all. However, to try and answer your question, I think the main thing is to have conversations about how we are feeling more often and more commonly, and actually proactively avoiding stigma to ourselves and to other people. when people say that they're struggling, or when people say, I don't really know how I feel, because that would have been my answer for the majority of the years when I was struggling. Other people knew I was iller than I did. I couldn't have articulated it. I just knew sometimes that things weren't great. So to talk to people and say, look, actually, like the pandemic's a great example of this. Yeah. Everyone was anxious during the pandemic. Yeah. Anyone who says they weren't is lying or willfully, deluding themselves, because the things that we took for granted were taken away from us. The ability to make plans for tomorrow, for next week, for next month were taken away from us. And that is an anxiety-inducing symptom. Ironically, and I'll be interested, Christelle, if you back this up, but my conversation with those of us who struggled a little bit with some of our mental health was the pandemic was just another thing. Not that we were blasé about it, but we had some mechanisms to cope with disruption, because I've had days when I didn't know which version of me was going to wake up. So not being able to make those plans wasn't as unusual, different, but it wasn't as unusual. Does that ring true, Christelle? I don't know.
Well, no, yes and no. So I was in those conversations where, you know what, we're used to this. Those of us that suffer from depression, anxiety, we're used to this. But for me, I will say, actually, it was my plummet into actually getting extreme help that I needed. It was my sign that I needed trauma therapy, which we've actually had my trauma therapist on the show.
We need to get this on again, actually. Yeah.
And he's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. We had him on in the midst of lockdown. So I've heard both. I needed it. It caused me to get the extra help I needed, but I've also heard, yes, many people were like, we have the skills for this. We've been preparing for this our entire life. So
I think it's true, and that would be true for me as well. That both, the pull was both directions. One being the immediate impact of the unknowingness of the pandemic was diminished to some extent because of that prior experience. But absolutely, some of the control mechanisms, the coping mechanisms that I had were taken away or were harder to access. And that absolutely, I either had to do something else, which, sometimes was possible, sometimes wasn't, or I had to find ways of coping without them, which again, sometimes wasn't possible. So yeah, definitely. I'm not wishing to make light of it at all, because it was a horrible time for everyone, and it's still going on. The reality is some people are still, very much having to live in lockdown for all kinds of reasons, and my heart goes out to them, and I try and help them if I can find them.
Absolutely. I do have a follow-up question, Tim, this time.
Well, we got some comments on one part.
Oh, we do. We have comments.
Gabriella.
Hi, Gabriella. So true. Reference the pandemic. Actually, the other stuff going down for me was much harder than the pandemic, and the lockdown gave me space to actually stop.
She's got a clarification of that to say, well, actually,
we're all clarifying. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't easy at all. All this pandemic was scary stuff, but yep, it was a very well disguised blessing. Yeah. I can see where you're coming from, Gabriella. Thank you. Andy, my follow-up question was, and I'm hoping it leads into some of the other questions we might have, but what did you do to get the help you needed personally for your own depression and anxiety and mental health breakdown?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most important stages of that was recognizing that I did need help, which took a lot longer than I care to admit. I say genuinely, I think I was the last person to know how ill I was in my life. I went through a marriage breakdown, which was not unrelated to my mental health issues. I think one fed into the other, and it was all complicated, like these things often are. I trained to be a priest in the Church of England, and that didn't turn out the way I was expecting it to, which I'm quite glad about, actually, or at least I come to terms with. But there's a factor of I'd been carrying this idea of who I was going to be, and then suddenly that idea was not accessible. So that was really interesting. So it took me quite a long time. One of the things that really helped me was having some people who were quite proactive in their determination to give me the time I needed to think that through. So that it's not that the people who were trying to point me to therapists or to prayer counselors or to confidence or whoever, or encourage me to go to see the GP. It's not that those people weren't helpful, but the people I think who had the most significant impact for me personally at that time were the people who said, well, we can see you're not doing very well. How can I help?
Yeah.
rather than you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. So going to a GP definitely helped when I plucked up the courage of that. And sometimes when I'm telling that story, it was like a physical weight off my shoulder. The phoning the GP was really hard because I had a lot of phone anxiety. Still do, actually. I'd much rather send an email than have a phone call. But even just booking the appointment, I was like, actually, this is serious, and I've done something about it. And although it was a teeny tiny step, I recognised it on some level that it was quite significant. Going to the GP and the GP saying, yeah, you're not making this up. I can see that you're struggling. Do the questionnaire. We'll think about medication. We'll think about CBT. We'll think about other therapeutic approaches. Again, that was really helpful, because I think maybe for the first time in 10, 30 years, I was able to go, things are not as they should be, and I want to do something about it. Two equally important sides of the same coin. And then again, the people, the professionals and supportive friends in my life who said, do you know what, this isn't going to change overnight. Like, it might even get worse before it gets better, but we will stand alongside you. That was the thing that gave me strength. I mean, literally people carrying me when I couldn't walk. That was the thing that got me through it and got me to start wrestling with the help that I needed to get.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to switch topic a bit. Let's talk about life coaching.
Yeah.
I know it's always a bit of a nebulous concept, but what would you say if somebody uses your services with the How the hell?
Yeah, I pronounce it Qua.
Coaching.
Yeah.
How would you define, if somebody approaches you, how would you define success with helping that person with life coaching? I mean, what would be a successful outcome in your minds? Maybe from theirs. I mean, if they're different things, but what would success be in life coaching? What would be the result of, what would be the best thing that you've done by helping that person?
That's a great question. Again, that's a brilliant coaching question. I mean, I'm really noticing even in myself that how twitchy I am with that word success, and it's not that it's the wrong word. It's just that I think I'm very conscious that it looks and feels and means different things for each of us. So, when I'm thinking about my coaching clients, success for them might mean admitting that they're struggling. It might mean a recognition that they're doing too much and that they need to stop something. It might mean recognizing that there's something that seems quite unrelated that's stopping them from taking a step forward. One of my very, very first clients, when I was still training, approached me. I've got permission to share this, so that's okay. Approached me because her line manager had asked her to do some public speaking training. We didn't talk about public speaking training at all, really, in the course of coaching sessions, because quite early on, she herself recognised that there were underlying fears behind the performance of public speaking that were, the public speaking was one activity of many that these fears were hampering in some way. So she started to tackle those fears and did amazingly. I mean, it's quite embarrassing on some levels that I think she was probably my coaching client who had the most immediate visceral success as a result of the sessions. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time. But so success was from her was recognizing that she had this inner dialogue, in her case, stopping her from doing things, and that she could ignore it, or she could ask it to say something different, or she could argue back, and her life, certainly in the immediate, was changed quite dramatically as a result. I have quite a lot of clergy clients as well, partly because of my own background. And clergy clients, often success for them is recognizing that other people's expectations of them will never be realized. And so they've got to work out what realistic expectations they can have of themselves. And genuinely, one of my favorite clients, one of their successes was really putting in boundaried time off, which was something that was relatively new to them. They knew it was the right thing to do, but it had never been top of the list of things to do. And through the coaching sessions, they recognized that actually to do the job that they felt called to do, they had to look after themselves better. And better as well is a bit nebulous, isn't it? But to have that boundary time off. So it means lots of different things. So I think, but in a nutshell, I'm not very good at short, pithy answers, am I? Goodness. In a nutshell, I think success is that a client comes out of a coaching session with a greater awareness of who they really are, who they want to be, and has one identifiable step to take, and is prepared to take it. That would be really successful.
I noted that you said you have quite a few clergy. How do you say it? Clients, clergy. Is it? Did I make it?
Oh, I love clergy. I'm going to start using that.
Is that even a word?
It is now.
It's not Ali G, it's clergy. Yeah.
I do this sometimes. Bear with me. You have a few clients that are of the pastoral sort.
Yes.
Bishops.
Yeah.
And beyond. And Andy, I know it must be really hard for them to find someone to talk to. Who do they go to? Who can they trust? They're in this leadership position. Who do they get to be their complete and utter selves with? Is there anything different about such types when they come to you? Where do you go with them? Yeah,
I mean, I think, firstly, I think my ideal client is somebody in a pastoral role. It doesn't have to be religious faith at all. I do quite a lot of work with charity leaders and so on, but people who are instinctively really good at looking after other people, but not always great at looking after themselves. In fact, it's a terrible business model because those people often struggle to justify their funding, the financial funding and the time funding for that coaching. Often the early sessions with those people, it's about wrestling them down to actually this time isn't to make you better at your job, although that may be an outcome. The time with you is to help you recognize what help you actually need, what permission you actually need, and who you need to get it from. Often it's themselves. There will be other people too, but often it's themselves is the key permission giver that they're resisting from. And maybe if they have a faith, to recognize what their God might be saying to them about it. And often their God is saying, yeah, look after yourself, please. That's good. That's part of the deal. But they often struggle because they're often in, when they're in situations where they are seeking help, there's normally a catch. It's normally a boss. It's normally a member of the congregation even who they feel, responsible for, responsible to, perhaps both. So to find somebody who's removed from the situation, who, and I hope I convince people fairly quickly, is genuinely interested in them as a person with no catches. I always say to people, I have no expectations of you other than that you're prepared to be honest with yourself here. That's the only thing I'm looking for with people. But it can be quite counterintuitive because they don't normally have those people. Like even if it's peer-to-peer support, there's, like in any business, in any walk of life, there's a little bit of professional curiosity about what the other person's doing, whether they got more people coming to church or whatever the success criteria is. So it can take a few sessions for them to understand that it's a safe place and it's just for them, because that's quite an unusual place for them to find themselves in, and it's quite a mind job for them to get their heads around acting for their own benefit.
Absolutely. And to find that safe space is a really big deal, not only for people in that profession, but all of us really.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I'm doing by the numbers, but we might as well talk about youth work.
Yeah.
Even though I know basically nothing about youth work, but I know Christelle's quite into youth work. She married a youth worker and the rest of it. So talk a bit about what you do and why you've still got youth worker on your LinkedIn profile and everywhere else. What do you do in terms of youth work?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, I don't do too much face-to-face youth work anymore, which is just what we in the trade call it, delivery of stuff. But I mean, I got into youth work because I went to a youth group. I went to a weird, glorious, terrible, chaotic youth group that was run at a church but sponsored by lots of different churches and other groups in the area, and it was, it had a weird identity that probably has spoken quite a lot into my own struggle with identifying and labeling myself and resistance to that. But when I kind of got to 15-ish, the deal was you either stayed on and helped in a voluntary capacity or you stopped coming, and it had been what I've been doing since I was 8. every Sunday afternoon. So it was a no-brainer for me. It wasn't particularly kind of noble act for me to volunteer myself. It was more well, this is what I do. But I very quickly just fell in love with it. Just fell in love with this idea of being there for people and helping people. I mean, for me, there's a direct correlation between what I now do and what I used to do, because my approach I now understand to youth work instinctively was always quite coachy. You know, it was about the role of the youth worker for me was to help the young person have some reflective space, to help the young person recognize their strengths and weaknesses, to help the young person recognize where their own voices or voices of other people were putting unfair limitations on them, or were being unrealistic about how much they could achieve within a time frame or whatever it was. And the bonus was we got to muck about and have quite a lot of fun and be quite irreverent and all that kind of stuff. That was just added bonus. And that's what I see when I'm supporting youth workers. That's the kind of youth work that I love to see them do. Youth work's a really broad church. I know you've had other youth workers on, but you know, faith-based youth work has a particular flavour, which itself can be confusing. So-called secular youth work has a different flavour, which can be confusing too. But in essence, it's about trying to help young people develop and have space. And I love, you know, I've always gravitated towards informal type of education rather than formal. So we're not saying an agenda. What are the learning points here? You know, what are the reflection points that we can notice as we're doing stuff, rather than today we're going to learn about whatever. Yeah. So
okay, Andy, we don't have a lot of time left, but you wrote some things down here and you were hoping we would talk about it. And a couple of these words are some of my favorite, so I have to get to it really fast. You were hoping we talk about creativity, preconceptions, and or poetry. I want to tap into creativity, and poetry can go into that, maybe even preconceptions, though I'm not sure how, but but the creativity and the poetry. Let's talk about that. You must be a creative soul of some sort, or perhaps you bring it into what you do. Tell us about this creative aspect of yours.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm kicking myself for putting that down. I mean, it's right. It's really important stuff to me. But I've got a confused and conflicted relationship with creativity. So I for years I was told, again, I'm not wholly sure whether it was external voices or my own like demons, as it were. But I was told, I fundamentally believed that I wasn't creative, that creativity was limited to a very niche, special set of people. And actually, partly through wrestling with my depression and anxiety, I've come to recognize that that's nonsense. I mean, I want to use stronger language, but I'm not sure about your swearing policy. You know, it's utter nonsense, and it's not only nonsense, but it's really dangerous nonsense, because it limits all of us. You know, we've all got a creative spirit or a creative impulse inside of us. I don't care, you know, how you think creation happened or evolution or whatever, but we've all got that. And one of the biggest lies that we've been told and that we tell ourselves is that it's only creative if it's good enough. And that's where the perception comes in. That's where a lot of my coaching comes in. Like, what is good enough? You know, so I write quite a lot of poetry, and most of it is rubbish. You know, most of it is just not very good, but it doesn't have to be, because what it is it's me trying to capture my thoughts or trying to make a point that I can't in another form. Likewise, I do some painting. You know, I have a weird relationship with painting where if I'm well enough, I don't paint. I have to be a bit depressed to kind of go into it. But again, the painting I do isn't depressing. It's a liberation for me. It's a chance to express what I'm feeling without having to explain it or justify it or even capture it coherently. You know, it's there and it means something, or it doesn't mean something. It's out. So I'm quite passionate about people re-engaging with creativity, and genuinely, you know, we like one of the kind of questions I love asking in coaching and youth work, in charity work, is what else is going on here? What else can you see? And I used to, there's an icebreaker type game that I used to love doing, where you just flip a flipboard and you genuinely make 3 random lines on it and say, right, what is that? Like, finish that drawing, and everybody draws something else. I mean, quite often people end up drawing a face because it's one of the most familiar things that people see, but everyone draws something differently. Like, for one person it's a horse, for somebody else it's a jug of water, for somebody else it's a car. And so that's the limitations are only what you've decided And what's interesting is sometimes when you do that, you know, I've had it where I've done the 3 lines and somebody's drawn a horse, and the next person said, "Oh, I thought it was a car, but I can see it's a horse now." I was like, "Well, no, it's still a car if you saw a car. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing." So to strip away the qualification of it needing to be good, because the flip side of it, you know, I'm saying my poetry is terrible, but some people like it. You know, I'm saying my pictures aren't anything to write home about, but I've sold some. You know, so what's good for one person is rubbish for somebody else, and vice versa. So even attaching a label such as good is just damaging and limiting. Rant over.
I mean, that creativity is such a big part and can be a big part of the healing process too. And in fact, creativity was step 1 in actually my recovery without me even realizing it. Because as you said, you can create something without using words. You can use color without using words. And it's a great way to express those things that are lying dormant as a very beginning step. I mean, how many artists do we find out are extremely depressed? And that's why they're such great poets and artists and authors. Tim, I think we were talking about that last week. In fact, authors sometimes having mental health challenges. And it's part of what makes them great authors.
You'd think. I'm going to quickly ask you a question. I haven't asked for a while. But if you had to describe yourself using 3 animals, which 3 animals would you pick?
I love that's such a euphoria question. That's like
Well, I used to ask this question on the show all the time, and I did a little clip, and we did an award for it. I haven't done it when you were talking about creativity. I thought,
I love that. Okay, so I go sloth.
Yeah, that's one I picked as well.
I might go for a bear, but I'm not quite sure what kind of bear. Maybe a black bear. You know, not quite as scary as a grizzly. And I'm going to go for a raven.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm not wholly sure.
Your wings are clipped, are they? Or are you a free floating?
I'm working quite hard to unclip my wings these days.
Yeah. Escape the Tower of London and you'll be in the local area.
That's awesome. Gabriella said, I love this. Creativity does not need to be saleable. It's something I've used a lot in various forms in my own journey. And I even got a qualification in art therapy because it was so important to me. Perfect. Yes, I'm a fan. Very good.
There's lots of art museums that are full of, frankly, terrible stuff, in my opinion, but to somebody it appeals to. And a lot of the time, art is how you react to it. So if somebody puts a black bag in the middle of the thing and says it's art, and everybody's repulsed by it, then you could claim it is art because people are having an emotional reaction to it.
Totally.
So,
absolutely. Andy, thank you so much for being here. I could have a million more questions for you. This was a lot of fun getting to know you. So thank you for coming on.
Likewise. Well, and next time you're over in the UK, we'll try and catch up, because Tim and I have discovered that we're just down the road from each other.
Yeah, it's about a 45-minute walk from me. So.
Oh, you guys are neighbors. Oh, you're BFFs now. Yay.
Yeah.
Well, I won't say we're neighbors.
And also because I know James virtually, but I've yet to meet him physically. So, we could combine that. It could be great. Little catch up, couldn't it?
So. Tim came and met us at, what was that railway station?
King's Cross.
King's Cross.
Not actually there's a pub in the station. It wasn't actually like me hanging around 9 3/4 or whatever the platform was.
It was the Harry Potter station. And so
yeah.
So yes, that'd be great. I would love that, Andy.
So we have to ask the question about how can people work with you and do all that sort of stuff, because that's kind of the point of the show in a way. It's like you have got your 1 minute to pitch to an elevator, because obviously elevators are the people that decide.
Yeah, elevators never done my work.
Yeah.
But so you can find me at Qua Coaching. If the advantage of nobody being quite sure how to pronounce it means that it's quite easy to find online. And most of the social media, like, I'm old, so Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, really, LinkedIn, should be Qua Coaching or a variation of it. And I have got a website, but as I believe your guests are contractually obliged to say, it's under a constant process of reconstruction. Is a bit rubbish at the moment, but you can find me that way. Come and just if you're remotely interested, book up a free 15-minute chat, no obligation, just to find out what's going on. And if I can't help you, I'll do my best to help you find somebody who can.
Wonderful. Oh, Gabrielle is in on our meetup. She wants to make sure she says that.
Yeah, totally, Gabrielle.
That's awesome. Thank you, Andy, again. I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully next time. Have a great week, everyone, for watching. Thank you. We will see you next week. Tim, do you know who's on next week?
You caught me out last week because all I can remember is his name was Andy, and I couldn't remember his surname, and I didn't have my phone on. No, it's Amber Picota.
Oh, this is exciting. Okay. Yay.
Yes.
Amber is
another person that Christelle invited on, so I'll have to do some research and find out who they are.
Well, Amber is an author and a former pastor, so this is going to be fun. This is going to be fun. Yay, I'm excited. Andy, thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you in person in the future. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
This is what God requires.